All right, our members are here today, so we'll call the meeting to order and look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I didn't want to start the meeting off with an important message and note. And the father's just making his way down here. So just give me a sec, sorry. Invited the father to hang out down here since he's always with the meetings with us. So after, it's been 8 years now, we've had Jeanette on the Police Service Board, longest-serving member, and she's a provincial appointee, and 3 years of those have been as chair. And she's been kind of the face of the board for many, many years. And I just wanted to thank her on behalf of the London Police Services Board for her many years. And I know there's a lot of people who want to say a lot of things today, so I'm going to go first to Jennifer Foster, and then there'll be a few other members who would like to speak.
And I never speak at these meetings, so you know this is special if I'm going to say a few words. I like to be behind the scenes. So I asked the chair if I could say a few words. Jeanette and I have an 8-year history, and a couple of months after I started in 2010 with this board, her name came across my desk as a new provincial appointee, and our paths had crossed just months earlier on a project at the City of London. So she was in her research capacity, and I was in my children's services capacity. And being new to LPS, I was really grateful to have a familiar face join my new little team. So, like I said, it's a long history. This is an extremely important and busy board, membership on which I feel conveys both high privilege and utmost responsibility, both to our police service and to our community. Most new members are surprised by the volume of work its affiliation brings. Policing has changed and the world has changed, becoming more complex, sometimes at breakneck speed, even in the relatively short span of 8 years while I've been a front row spectator. This board, with all of its changing faces and voices, has covered a lot of territory. And let's be honest, some of the terrain has been rough. Jeanette, thank you for your huge contribution to this board and for always, getting choked up, making time for the countless items I'd needed from you to manage the continuity of this business, particularly during your time as chair and vice chair of the board. Your work often came at the expense of your own personal busyness, including, certainly no small task, the completion of your PhD at Ivey. You always fulfilled your board responsibilities and more. Your work ethic is enormous, and I believe your energy, time commitment, and very caring contribution to this board is unprecedented. I hope we never have to do a back pay calculation on the hours you've put in. Now's your time to focus on some other pursuits and passions. Thank you for your hard work and commitment to this board and the community, and thank you for your friendship and the laughs. We wish you all good things, and we will miss you.
Mayor Brown.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And wow, it's a tough act to follow because you're a person that has been working with Jeanette throughout the entire time. I can say that I've had an opportunity to work with you, Jeanette, as a council member when I was the Ward 7 councillor and you were representing the London Police Service Board, and now as a board member as well. And I agree, your leadership style is one that a lot of people could learn from. And the last time I spoke about this, when you stepped down from the chair, I think I used the words calm, cool, and collected. And that is, I think, what you bring to every challenge that we faced as a board, whether those are budget challenges or otherwise. And I think that's the exact kind of leadership that we needed, someone that was steering the ship and also considering just how turbulent the environment that the ship was in at that time to make sure that we could reach our destination. And so it's gonna be tough to see you go. I know that that when a person puts their name forward for public service like this, oftentimes at the beginning of the experience, they don't realize what kind of commitment that they're putting forward. And I can say that you've always been there, even when even when there's been an issue, and I've had to call and interrupt a Christmas dinner. You would pick up the phone and you'd be there. And so, just in closing, I'd like to say that service like this needs to be recognized and commended by the entire community, because it doesn't come without a price. And you have earned a little bit of free time and an opportunity to pursue your next challenge. So on behalf of, well, I'll say on behalf of City Council and on behalf of the entire City of London, thank you for what you've contributed to London over the past many years. Thank you.
Chief. I don't know, do they save the best for last? I'm just scarce, but...
We've got 3 more speakers.
Oh, okay. And it's a rose between two thorns, but... just on behalf of the men and women of the London Police Service, Jeanette, I really want to thank you for your dedication and commitment to your role in the London Police Services Board. Over 8 years, you've took your role very seriously and gave much of your personal time, getting to know what we do and how we do it. I just wanted to provide some highlights over the last 8 years. So you worked with 5 different deputy chiefs, 3 chiefs, so the tail end of Chief Faulkner's career, and then directly responsible for the hiring of 2 other chiefs, Brad Duncan and myself. I think at this point we should probably ask you which one was your favorite, or maybe just write it down on a piece of paper and show it to me later. Yeah. The development of 3 business plans, and we had an earlier discussion about our business plan. We're at 8 operating and capital budgets, so that was 4 individual years and 1 4-year budget. We spent a lot of time in this room. In fact, I probably think there were some years we were here more than some of the council members, but 2 contract negotiations with the London Police Association. Those are never easy discussions when you think about the impact to the taxpayer and the impact to our members, but you survived both of those. You took the time to get to know our members and, like I said, what they do and the challenge they face. I think of the number of things that you've did, and I've probably missed a few here, but you participated in Citizens Academy. You completed numerous ride-alongs with Frontline, Persons at Risk Coordinator, Human Trafficking Investigators, the CORE unit. You did ride-alongs on Homecoming and St. Patty's Day. You conducted foot patrol with frontline officers. You sat in on our 911 center, and you spent time in our cell block. That didn't sound too good. In fact, you voluntarily came to our cell block to make some observations. You never spent any time there. You participated in numerous community consultations, community meetings, town hall meetings, everything from street checks to business planning to just hearing concerns from the community and what some of their needs are. And you gave a lot of your time, put aside your demands, and as Jennifer said, while you're trying to complete your PhD, but some of us thought you were just avoid writing your thesis. And I know that many of our members appreciated the personal notes recognizing their achievements, or simply letting them know that you were thinking about them during times of need. You challenged us, you encouraged us, and you supported us. And during some very difficult times, you stood with us, and that meant a lot. And I personally appreciated our many chats. You're a very patient listener to listen to many of my rants, and you gave me great advice, and for that I thank you. You will be missed, but I know somehow our paths will cross again. So thank you very much.
Hopefully not in cells.
No.
Thank you very much. That was very beautiful. I wanted to give the last word, the final last word to Jeanette, but I just want to also recognize members of the, sorry, okay. There's also Susan. There's a lot of people who want to talk about you, so I'll turn over to Susan real quick.
Following up with to the chief and Jennifer, that's a terrible position to be in, so I'll keep my comments really brief. We've only had the opportunity to work together for a year, and I just wanted to say that I know that when I first started, it wasn't always smooth sailing, and I hope you know that even though we didn't always agree, I never really saw that as a bad thing. I always saw that as a wonderful example of diverse thoughts coming together and what I really valued was you were always willing to hash it out with me. We could have these phone conversations. We would be so brutally honest with each other. And that was a real gift. You forced me to reconsider my position, make sure that I was being deliberate and thoughtful. You always came from these issues, trying to balance all of these. Really, part of being on the board is balancing, you know, what's positive for the community, what's positive for administration, what's positive as well for our frontline police officers. And you were always trying to balance all those things, and your knowledge and wisdom was always welcome. And I think in particular, I never doubted your integrity, your commitment, your knowledge. And so thank you for all those times when you could have just said, you know what, I'm not even going to talk to you, but you were always willing to talk it out. And I really appreciate that. And we're really going to miss you.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Jeanette, and sorry to put you on the spot, Jeanette, you'll have to say something before you leave. But I just wanted to say, again, on behalf of the police board, thank you for your many years of service, and you've done a great job for Londoners. And I also want to recognize that many Londoners are probably wondering why we're meeting here on a Friday today, is because we had to move this meeting date. And her term was coming up for an expiration on April 16th. And Jeanette, being Jeanette, was willing to have one additional meeting. Last month would have been her last meeting, but that just kind of shows her dedication. So we wanted to make sure that we had more people around the horseshoe. So I'm personally thankful for her accommodating that and making that a success for us. So without any further comment from myself, Jeanette.
Well, thank you, everyone. They're all wonderful comments. I hope we have a recording of this so I can send them to all of my children so that they can listen to these things. Speaking of doing battles over kitchen tables with them, it was over the years. Really, I'm overwhelmed, so I'm not going to say very much. I said a few things when I finished my last day as chair, but I'll just say a few things. I remember I was replacing Shanti Radcliffe, a wonderful person and contributor to this community, and I had known her from other community work I had done, and I said, Shanti, they've invited me to sit on this police board. Do you think I want to do that? And she said, it's one of the most interesting things I've ever done. And she was never more right. It's been fascinating. I've learned so much about this police service and this community by being on this board and doing some of those ride-alongs. Matt, you mentioned being calm, cool, and collected. My husband has a great expression, it's sort of like a duck, calm, cool, and collected on the surface, but paddling like hell underneath. And so that's the way it felt many times. But I always knew that it was good to have those discussions, as Susan said. It was good to take an extra look at things. And so if I helped steer through some of the difficult times and celebrate some of the good times, I appreciate those comments. I'm not going to talk too much about the men and women of this organization who've taken me into those police cars and those cells and those various places with them. Professionalism doesn't even begin to speak to the impression I have of them. So thank you to all of them for doing that for me. I'm going to calm down now and just say, I don't know what the next adventure is. I hope it's half this exciting. And thank you very much to all of the chiefs, everybody, and all the board members. I would extend that to that I've served with over time, including the ones obviously around this table right now. There's a great team here. I think your ranks are going to be diminished substantially for a short period of time, but I have great confidence that the work will move forward and with a lot of great people who are here. So thank you very much to this community, and I should say to the province who appointed me to serve for 8 years.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. So just wanted to confirm, because it's in my minutes again, disclosure of pecuniary interest, I didn't see any earlier on. So we'll go to the introduction of item number 3, human resources agenda. And sorry, introduction of any new business, and I believe there's a few of those. The first one is the human resources agenda item, and then the 2018 budget community safety highlights.
And striking of subcommittees.
And striking of subcommittees. And so we'll look for a motion to move that. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Jeanette. All those in favor? And it carries. All right. So look for a motion to move the minutes from the March 2018 meeting. Moved Moved by Susan, seconded.
Sorry. There was one typo that Jeanette found, and it was, so I've
When you said there's one typo that Jeanette found, the chief turned to me and said, "Go figure." I was famous for doing that to people. So, yeah, I think it was on page 8. I don't think it's Bill 1785, although it may have seemed like that. I think it was Bill 175. So subject to those corrections.
Perfect, so that will be noted, and we'll look for a motion to receive. Moved by Jeanette, sorry, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? And it carries. So look for a human resources report from Deputy Longworth. Look for any questions, or if you wanted to start off with anything, Deputy?
No, it's subject to any questions the board might have.
All right, perfect. So just for the members of the public, sometimes there might not be questions because sometimes the report is suffice and sometimes maybe there's conversations offline. So look for a motion to receive. Moved by Susan, seconded by Jeanette. All those in favor? And it carries. Deputy Longworth again with LPS, London Police Service Special Funds. So look for any questions on that or unless you had a comment. Same thing goes. So look for a mover. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Jeanette. All those in favor? And it carries. And the use of force annual report by Deputy Longworth.
Yeah, I think I will comment on this one. As the report indicates, there were 257 use of force reports completed in 2017, which is a 13% increase over 2016. But if I can put that in perspective, when you consider that we attended over 100,000 calls last year, the percentage of times our officers had to use force and submit a report is about 0.2%. And if you factor in the hundreds of thousands of other police interactions we have in the community, whether they be traffic stops, meetings on the streets, or the other many other ways we interact with the community throughout the year, that percentage will drop significantly. Although our officers could encounter a violent subject at any type of incident they attend, it could be a break and enter, it could be a domestic violence call or a serious injury call. I did specifically dig a little bit further into weapons calls, for instance, in 2017, which were up 27% last year. And that was 92 incidents versus 72 in 2016. Calls that our officers attended where a subject was actually armed with a gun went from 20 to 62. Calls that are attended by our members where people were carrying a knife went from 9 to 35. All the use of force incidents that get submitted are reviewed through a supervisor level, and then they're reviewed by our use of force training branch to look for any trends, to look for any issues that need to be addressed with the individual officer if the force was used improperly. All those, and I can comment that all the reports from last year as part of that process were reviewed, and there was no concerns with any of the use of force that was taken. Our officers are trained to use as much force as necessary, and once compliance is gained, to de-escalate. They do that very well. I would like to comment on one part of the report that you may have seen on injuries to officers, which was only one on the report. That's a box that's checked on the report, so that would indicate that one officer was injured in all of those 257 use of force reports. But I know for certain that our officers are injured far more frequently than that, so we looked into some of that information. 50 of our members were injured last year while working and attending to calls. 15 of those required medical attention. 16 of those 50 injuries involved deliberate assaults on our members. Punching, kicking, spitting, biting. I have a list of all the injuries that the officers faced, and it's not pretty. And I just want to frame that properly. So I think we have to have, whenever we're looking at these stats, we have to understand the environment that our officers are operating in. It's not always a safe place out there. There is risk that they take on each and every day when they attend these calls and strap on that uniform. I also finally just want to comment on the conducted energy weapons, which, as you see, there was, and as commented on by the newspaper, there was a spike last year. We did have opportunity to put more on the street over the last few years. So with more out there, you're going to see more instances where they're used. But I do want to point out that it is a very effective, it is proven to be a very effective tool in gaining compliance with individuals. So much so, and it's so well known out there, that of the times it was used, that high number that was that was cited in the report, 75% of those times, it was merely demonstrated and shown that if you don't comply, we may have to resort to a conducted energy weapon. And that quite often, obviously 75% of the time, gains compliance. So subject to any questions you want to ask me about the specific numbers, that's my comments.
Thank you, Deputy. Look for members from the board for questions or comments. Jeanette?
Thank you, Deputy Chief, especially for the context. That's really helpful, I think, for board members to know. Two questions, really. First of all is, of all the information that's tracked on that, one of the big concerns I think that people have with use of force of any kind is to do with mental health issues. We get a lot of mental health calls. Do we track the relationship between whether or not there's a mental health component to the call and use of force at all?
No, it's really hard to draw any kind of conclusion as to why use of force stats may be rising or falling. As you know from your research days, drawing that correlation is difficult to do, especially with mental health. I don't think we would ever want to in any way identify the fact that mental health is indicative of violent behavior. I think it's something we try to deal with throughout society, and our officers are trained to deal with mental health issues, but to draw any kind of correlation between the increase in mental health related incidents and the use of force by our officers, I don't think is something we can really draw that connection to.
Just on that, and I do a lot with mental health organizations locally and provincially, and one of the biggest perceptions out there is that people in mental health crisis are violent, and that adds to the stigma when people are trying to reach for help. And people with mental health are not necessarily more violent than you or I. People that are in crisis are looking for help, and that's what's important here. And there are thousands and thousands of occurrences across this province where police officers have de-escalated situations with people in crisis. In fact, we often get called by health professionals to come and help them to de-escalate situations. So I think that there are those cases that end in tragedy, and you always look to make improvements around that. But our officers do a very good job of de-escalating when in situations where people are in crisis.
Thank you for that extra background. In fact, we were at the community consultation, was it last night or 2 nights ago, with Justice Tulloch around the street check issue, and we were in roundtables, and someone who is a social worker, community worker, pointed out that fact that we keep track of these kinds of statistics, but we don't keep track of the ones where they're de-escalated. So these are the things that hit the news media, but not the times, the good relationships, the good encounters, and the de-escalation. So I think those are important things to remember, what's on the other side of these statistics. Thank you.
So I think I'll just ask from the chair, because I think that was a question that would be helpful. Just for members of the public that Jeanette had put forward about the de-escalation stats. Is that just difficult to keep track of, or just to have a broader picture?
I think it would be difficult to track in a meaningful way, because sometimes just the mere officer's presence showing up is a de-escalation technique that calms the situation down because the officer's there. So I think we could look at ways, but I think it would be very difficult to track that.
Fair enough, thank you. So look for any other board members. Helmer?
Looking at the appendix, which kind of breaks down into a bit more detail, when we're looking at instances where firearms are discharged, can you give a sense of when that would happen, and maybe speak a bit to, because there's quite a significant change year over year, even if you're looking at the 4-year average before that, what's motivating that?
Yeah, I can advise that all of the incidents where firearms were discharged in 2017 were disposing of animals that for humanity or humane reasons. Why the drop? I can't say for certain. I know in the several previous years there had been large distemper outbreaks within the raccoon and skunk populations, and that I think had driven the number up somewhat. Whether that's changed in the animal world over 17, I can't say for certain.
So just to be clear, so for 2017, every time a firearm was discharged, it wasn't in a human police interaction. That's not what's happening.
That's correct. Every single incident in 2017 involved an animal, disposing of an animal.
So I think it's helpful first to keep these numbers in the bigger context of all the interactions that police are having with folks in the community. I think everybody wants the use of force to be only when necessary and only as much as is necessary to handle the situation. I think it's a really good thing that through an entire year, all these interactions in the community, even with people who are armed, there was no discharging of firearms at all in an entire year to resolve all these things. Like, I think that's very good record, and I think that's the kind of thing we'd like to see in policing and in the community. I remember I was at the public meeting when you were talking about conducted energy weapons, and at the time I was pretty skeptical about whether this was a good idea. You know, it's a lot of training, it's pretty expensive, and, you know, to put all these conducted energy weapons out there. But, you know, I think even when you look at those numbers, they're not being used that often either. And, you know, like you look at how often they're being used, 62 times in 2016, 100 last. That's not very often considering how many people are carrying them and how many incidents that they're responding to. And I think it's proving out, you know, despite the fact that I was a bit skeptical about it, that they are helpful, you know, and so even just having it available and people knowing that it could be used without even having to use it. So obviously I think we'd like to see injuries down, right? You know, we don't want anybody to get injured, no officers and nobody else as well. But they are down, you know, you look at it and the injuries that are happening, they're not, for the most part, they're not serious injuries, they're minor injuries. And I think that's also a really positive thing. I had a question around effectiveness and ineffectiveness, and this is just something, because I'm new to the board, I don't think I really understand, you know, the kind of escalation there where you say, so I tried a certain use of force and it was ineffective and then I did something else. Is that the kind of idea? Because eventually you're going to try something. Once one method, it proves ineffective.
Yeah, there's no set standard of what level of force the officer will use at, you know, at this, you will use this. It's a assessment on the officer's part based on the circumstance they're facing. So you're right, there could be a progression that this has been ineffective, and keep going. It may need the officer to jump right to the top level because of the urgency, the risk that's being faced. You'll notice that there were 455 incidents where the use of force was deemed to be effective. That's significantly higher than the total number of use of force reports filled. So even there, it may be situations, in fact, I know those are situations where in one specific incident, they may have used one level of force, they gain compliance, you know, and then they move in to make the handcuffing and then the fight's on again and now they have to use another level of force. So there might be multiple levels of effective interventions by the officers until such point that they can get them compliant and contained within the police vehicle and into the cells or anything like that. Even arrest on the street, transport into the cells, there might be several different use of force incidents because we respond to the level of threat that's presented to us. So it's varying as you indicated. I hope that helps frame your question or answers your question.
It does, and the other piece that wasn't in the report, but I'm glad that you added it at the beginning was, you know, the kind of calls where you get called to, okay, this person is armed. And, you know, that obviously you're going to have a different situation there. If there's more calls like that, then you would expect there'd be more corresponding uses of force related to that kind of threat level. So is that a trend that you're seeing on a longer term basis where there's more calls for service where somebody is armed with a knife or some other kind of weapon? Is that something that's unique to last year? I know you don't want to draw too many conclusions from any 1 year of data, but is that something that's becoming a bit of a trend?
I don't think I'd want to comment too much on that one. I only looked at the 1 year, year-to-year comparison. I think we would certainly look at the numbers. I might guess that they're probably rising, but I can't say that for certain. And whether that's a trend we'll continue to see in the future. I know one of the things we are concerned about is the number of people carrying replica weapons, which is, there was an incident, I believe, even last night. You know, those kind of weapons, we don't know whether they're real or false. And I challenge anybody from 10 feet away to look at a replica weapon and make a quick snap determination when you need to, when your life depends on it, whether it's real or not. So That's one thing I have noticed over the years is the increase in the amount of weapons calls we were related that actually aren't weapons, but they're people carrying around replicas. And if there's any message I can send out to the public over this is don't carry those types of weapons around.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to tack on a question that Amr had brought in, but just go a little further. When it comes to the animals and for the, I guess, to deal with them in a humane way, I know you guys are, can you touch on why we're in those situations? Because you guys are the ones who are only 24/7. We don't have animal control to kind of necessarily address those kind of issues, to deal with that in those humane issues. Can you kind of just touch on it, just for context for the public?
Most times it's out of expediency that our officers, like you said, are quite often available 24/7. There could be a threat posed to the public where we don't have time to call and wait for somebody else, if there is even anybody else available, or it's on the middle of a roadway. You know, there's varying differences where it's obstructing traffic. So yeah, we're there. The decision is made that it needs to be done and it needs to be done quickly.
So I guess from that, do you think that there's still feedback that needs to be brought over to the city or the, you know, the animal control to make sure that there's resources, or that it's a 24-hour kind of service, or does it feel as if, you know, these are excruciating circumstances where it only happens very infrequent, or do we still need to have that conversation with different agencies to kind of address that so that your officers aren't having to deal with that? I just kind of wanted to know.
I think it's infrequent enough that it's not a huge drain on our resources. It's something we'll continue to monitor if it does become to be a burden on the service. But at 20 or whatever the number, I don't have the report right in front of me right now. But whatever, it's low enough that it's infrequent enough that it's not a huge demand.
Member Susan?
Thank you, Chair, through you. So from what I gather from this chart, and I really appreciate you both providing some context, because I think the numbers don't always tell the whole story, so that was very helpful. So every single use of force incident is recorded and captured in this chart. Is that correct?
There's certain criteria that we have to report on when a member draws in their service weapon, when they discharge their weapon, using one of their other use of force weapons on an individual, or using any physical force that results to an injury to that person. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, just mere presence could be deemed use of force. Handcuffing a person could be deemed use of force, but handcuffing does not require the use of force. It's those four main criteria events that would trigger the use of force reporting mechanism.
Just to follow up, so in terms of tracking the use of force data, is it the officers know what the criteria are to report, and so they'll see that criteria and go, okay, I have to report that, and a report is made, use of force incident?
Yeah, the report is actually a physical report that needs to be completed. The officers know through training, their supervisors and the auditors who review the incidents know through training. So there's auditing processes to catch along the way should a use of force have not been submitted, to catch and ensure those use of force are submitted. But the officers frontline are trained well enough to know when they need to submit them.
I'm just going to go back to something else because again, this is the first time I've seen one of these, so I'm trying to get my mind around it. You said that only use of force that cause injury is tracked. So who determines the injury? Are we talking a bruise, or are we talking like what stage is that set out in policy as well?
Yeah, it's set out in the regulation. My response was a little too brief. It's injury requiring medical attention. That's the better definition, the fuller definition.
Members? So I did have a question from the chair. Is there, I know Helmer was touching on it, but it was hard for you to draw any correlations. But when I see going from 20 to 62 arm calls and then 9 to 35, you know, it's a big spike, and, you know, concern that puts everyone in public and officers in harm's way. Is there kind of any kind of comment on that or I know that's maybe hard for you to answer, but I thought I'd still ask because members of the public are going to ask me anyway, and just trying to have a better understanding of that.
Other than it's a concern for our members, it's a concern for the safety of our members and the risks they face each and every day. I really can't comment any further on the correlation on what that means for the greater society or the future.
And just because I know you mentioned it earlier, you gave the numbers where 50 members were injured, 15 required medical attention after, and then there was 16 deliberate assaults. So if there was 50 members that were injured and but only 16 deliberate assaults, that difference there, were they injured maybe perhaps pursuing the person? Just so I'm trying to understand the gap in those numbers.
It's not really captured in the report. Actually, they were injury reports that were submitted, not on the use of force reports. It's just a myriad of things. It could have been jumping over a fence and twisting their knee. It could have been in a foot pursuit. Most times it is a physical altercation with someone where they've popped their shoulder out or injured a knee, those kinds of things.
I know there wasn't, sorry for the back and forth from the chair, the board will allow me. I know when I was looking at the increase in use of force reports, and there's not many reports out there yet. You guys are one of the earlier police services to kind of put your reports out. I think the only one that I was able to read about, not even find the report, was Halton Region. And I think even then there was an increase. Are you familiar with any other reports that kind of come out and just kind of the provincial conversation around reports? Because at least Halton has gone up. And I think last year Hamilton had said they went down. Have you guys had a chance to kind of look at what's going on around the province yet, or those reports haven't all been produced yet?
I've read the Halton report similar to you, and I'm not sure, I can't comment on what state the other are in, whether they're going to be released soon or have been released. Halton's the only one I've seen.
So look for any other board members on this. All right, and Deputy, anything else, or are you good on that? All right, so look for a motion from the board members, moved by the mayor, seconded by Jeanette. All those in favor? And it carries. Says Chief Williams, but I know he's away, getting more learned for us. So I'm assuming it'll be Deputy Longworth or the chief, I'm not sure who's presenting that.
I'll do my best to fill in for Deputy Williams. The report's pretty self-explanatory for both Crime Stoppers and the pursuit. There were 3 pursuits so far this year, and those numbers you're seeing, the pursuit categories over from 2013 to 2018 are all first quarter reports for those calendar years as well. So subject to any questions you may have.
All right, so I'll look for a motion from the board. Moved by Jeanette, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? And it carries. So Deputy Williams isn't here, so I'm assuming it'll be Deputy Chief Longworth for relation to complaints against police.
Again, the report is there, the numbers are there. The number of complaints received in the first quarter, again, on the chart, are there for the first quarters of comparable years going back 5 years. And they are consistent. You'll see that the numbers are fairly consistent across the board. Nothing unusual to note, subject to any questions you may have.
Board members, any questions on the complaints? Okay, I think, sorry, go ahead.
Just because we've talked about this before as a board, I did want to point out at the end of that report again, some of the length of the investigations from SIU, and one of the longest one was 553 days, which is almost 2 years. So because that's a topic that's near and dear to the board's heart, and certainly to administration and police services, I just wanted to point that out again.
Looking, not seeing any other board members, I guess I'll weigh in. So I think, Deputy, because I think it's helpful again to remind the public on these conversations, is the SIU was a good example with those delays. Just as far as operation-wise, I think it seems, for me, it seems to be a strain on obviously the individual officer, but also for you guys being able to do what you need to do when you have someone who's maybe under an SIU investigation. So I don't know if you wanted to maybe comment on that briefly. I know you guys in the past have kind of touched on that, but I think it's also helpful for the members of the public to remind them that, as well as the province, because I think sometimes that creates unnecessary hardship for everyone involved. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, Deputy.
I think I would just echo your comments that it puts an enormous amount of strain and pressure, not only the officer, but the officer's family. And to have it drag out that long is it's not acceptable, basically.
And I just had another question, relation to complaints. Do you find as if now complaints, and maybe you might not have those interactions directly, but do you find that the public is more educated, more aware of knowing how to reach out to those resources and bring forward complaints, I guess? Or do you find that there's still some barriers or some ways where we can improve? I know at the headquarters, I think there's flyers and pamphlets that people can get when they walk in if they wanted to file a complaint. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, Deputy?
I think the public has become more aware of the complaints process, the OIPRD process. We do have literature available to them. We do explain that to them. We do have a number of complaints, as you can see, that are also handled at the frontline supervisor level. So I would like to think that the public has a little bit increasing faith in the police services as well, that they will address, they'll hear their complaints, they'll address their complaints, they'll look into it, and there'll be some kind of resolution. So I would always like to think that that relationship is improving on a regular basis.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, go ahead, Susan.
I wonder if it wouldn't be worth at some point during a public meeting for people, I know we've done some good job educating on that process, but actually bringing that as a presentation to the board and for members of the public who may tune in to understand that process and how it works and what the timelines are, how those investigations occur, just in terms of a public service.
So is that a motion? I don't know if the administration want to comment or so.
It's really more something but obviously I would welcome input, but it's really more something that, is that something that the board feels that is part of their mandate to take on? Because I know the administration, they do that public education work. Is that also something that we might want to engage in as well separately?
So I'm guessing she's looking for board members' feedback on that. Mayor Brown?
Well, I think it's a good idea. I think it as the deputy chief has pointed out, that it's likely that people are feeling more comfortable than ever before using mechanisms like this. But that's no reason to stop. I think that continuous improvement is something that we can all be focused on, and I would support a motion like that. I think it's good education for the board, and in turn, good education for the public.
Seeing Councillor Hammer?
So I would certainly support having a professional standards branch, like other units in the police, if they wanted to come forward and talk about what they're doing and how people can engage with them and their work. I think that's helpful. I don't want to read too much into a report on one quarter, in terms of how much people are coming forward or not, or how much that we can, take anything from that. I'm certainly glad to see the numbers. It appears like they're kind of reverting down to the mean, which is they dropped from last year, which was a bit higher across all categories. And I'm glad to see it be a bit lower, but it's also only 3 months. So I think we got to be careful about drawing too strong conclusions from it. I'd like to see some presentations at this board in the public meeting about policing in general, and then this is one aspect of it, right? To make sure that the professional standards are being met, to make sure that people, when they have complaints, to come forward. So I think that's fine, but I also think there's all kinds of other areas of policing where I think it'd be helpful to expose ourselves and also the public to what the police are doing in those areas.
So I'm not sure if that would be a friendly amendment for other exposures in other areas, but I think the chief had a comment as well.
Yeah, there's no issue with doing presentations for the board, but just caution around the complaint process with the changes coming from Bill 175 and having to do it twice. I think maybe it might be wise just to kind of see when after the provincial election how things roll out, and we can go from there in relation to that. But the other presentations we can set up. We used to do years ago. Now, at that time, we had a board that had been around for a while and had gone through many of those operational presentations. And we used to organize one from each division every year as part of the schedule for the public board meetings. So we could look at implementing a similar system on a go-forward basis.
Great. So I'm seeing consensus, and I see that the motion, maybe it'll be helpful if you want to read it back just for Jennifer.
So my motion with, I'm going to try to paraphrase the friendly amendment, would be to educate both the board and then in turn in the public meeting, the public, around the complaints process, and to add in Chief Perry's comments to perhaps just put a little bit of a pause on that. This is a long motion. I'm terrible at doing motions as I make them paragraphs long. Wow. Anyways, to wait a little bit until that bill comes into force. And then to add on to that, to not stop there, but to do continuous education with the various departments. Boom.
So, seeing any speakers? Seconded by the mayor. And we'll call the question. All those in favor? And it carries.
Good luck with that then.
All right. Chief Williams is not here, so again, Deputy Longworth, in relation to dispositions of returned items.
Yeah, this one's quite a small amount. Usually they're quite a little bit larger anyway, but it is incumbent upon us to just report back to the board whenever we are disposing of these items that generate revenue that go into the board's account. So that's the purpose of this report.
Any questions? Look for a motion. Oh, Jen.
Make the motion to accept the motion.
Okay, accept the move by Jeanette, seconded by the mayor. All those in favor? And it carries. Then we have an update for number 11 from a meeting from Teresa Donnelly from the West Region Sexual Violence. She's a Crown, and we have Vice Chair Toff on leading that.
Thank you, Chair. So for those of you who don't know, Teresa Donnelly, as the Chair mentioned, is a Crown attorney, and right now her current position is to be the West Region Sexual Violence Crown. And she offered to come speak to the board and specifically presented to us a historical overview, systems information around how sexual assault investigations and court cases have gone from her perspective, both historical, as I mentioned, and also currently, some of the evolutions in that process, including evolutions in how investigations are held. It was a very, very informative, time-shocking, but also hopeful presentation on her part. And on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank her for taking the time to come and meet with us. Part of her meeting with us was to bring forward some suggestions that the board could undertake. And one that came out, there was two big takeaways that came from her presentation. And one was her talking to us about something called a third-party reporting system, which is right now something that Vancouver does, and there's variations of it in other communities. And essentially, it's a manner for people to go to a third party and report assaults, and they can choose to do so anonymously, but that information does get tracked by the police. And I think I'll just turn it over briefly to the chief, because he has been in discussions about that third-party reporting and perhaps can give us a bit of an update.
Thank you. Yes, actually Teresa shared that with me early last year. I shouldn't say early, it was during the discussions around the unfounded sexual assaults, and as we looked at ways to improving our process. And I have shared that with the Community Advisory Committee that we work with around sexual violence investigations. So we have that on the agenda as an important tool that we would like to bring to our community. But as you know, there's a lot of other wheels moving at this point in time, and we just haven't had the opportunity to look at that or to begin that process. But it is definitely something that we are looking at as an important tool in our community that will allow victims to report to a third-party agency, but still allow the police to capture some information they may be beneficial around, identifying, sexual predators or other incidents that allow us to take appropriate action to protect the people in our community.
Thank you so much for that, Chief. I look forward to seeing how that evolves. I think that could be a very, very powerful tool. The second recommendation from Ms. Donnelly was with respect to what's called adequacy standards. So if you don't know what that is essentially there is a police adequacy standard that was implemented, and it gets updated, unfortunately not super regularly. And the last major update was in 2000. And at that point in time, there were some really specific steps that were implemented in that standard for domestic violence. So what it does is it standardizes, even though it's not mandatory, it standardizes investigations into domestic violence. So one of the suggestions that Ms. Donnelly had was having the board do some advocacy around encouraging, updating that standard to also include sexual assault investigations. So London can do all sorts of excellent progressive moves, doing victim-centered, trauma-informed approaches, but that's just London. So how can we take that province-wide? So there's a few things that we could do, and I'm going to be bringing a motion to encourage both the ministry to update the adequacy standards and implement a more specific standardized approach to sexual assault investigations, and as well as perhaps putting that on the agenda for the OAPSB, which is the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards. And they're sort of the umbrella group here in Ontario for all police services boards. So put that on their agenda, as well as, again, sending a letter to the ministry encouraging them to do some of those updates.
Perfect. So that's been moved by Susan, seconded by Mayor, Helmer. Go with Helmer, I guess. So any discussion? So I guess I'll speak from the chair. I'm happy to support that. I think that's great. So thank you for bringing that forward, and the chief as well, and all those conversations. I think it's an important conversation. I think the public's would probably be very supportive of this. So without seeing any other speakers on this, Helmer.
Thank you. I wanted to say it was really helpful to hear from Teresa Donnelly. I thought that was really useful, and I certainly support the recommendation to take something to the ministry. And I was glad to hear the chief talking about the third-party reporting. Around this horseshoe, we were talking with Nova, who's leading the Safe Cities initiative here at the city, and there was some discussion around the platform that they wanted to create so that people could report, and this issue of third-party reporting. In fact, I had just learned about it from Ms. Donnelly, and then I brought it up in that discussion. I said, it seems like there's something we could do here, that, you know, we're trying to do the same thing almost. And I think that there's a real opportunity there, something that the police can find useful. There's more information that can be used for analysis, a better way for people to come forward when they don't want to go directly to police and make a specific complaint or look for charges to be brought. And I think that there's a real opportunity there. I'm glad the folks in BC have kind of forged ahead and created what they have already. Hopefully we can learn from that and implement it here in a way that's going to work for us. I think it's really a great opportunity to make the city safer for people.
Any other speakers? And we'll call the question. All those in favor? And it carries. New business, 2018 Budget Community Safety Highlights. Email to April 12th. So look for any discussion on that, or any speakers? All right, so seeing none, we'll just look for a motion to receive the report. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? And it carries. I believe we also had, was there any? I did want to add.
Subcommittee, striking the subcommittee.
Correct. So we had, in the agenda earlier, we added additional business for subcommittees, just because last meeting or the meeting before, we had, as a board, decided to move ahead with subcommittees, which is a new kind of approach in London Police Service Board, now that we've gone to 7 members, or I guess we've expanded to 7 members, but we don't currently have 7 members. But the subcommittees would really kind of help the flow of meetings. As you see with the City of London, there's a strategic priorities planning committees, civic works meeting committee. And so we have those 3 subcommittees here, and we're going to try to form some of those membership today at this meeting. So we'll just look for interest from members. We'll read out each of the names of each groups. The first one being the Legal, Governance, and Policies Committees, and just look for interest from members to see if there was anyone interested in joining that subcommittee. So Susan, as well as Helmer, and Mayor Brown.
Well, we're only going to do 2 per, given the size, I'll stay out of that.
Okay, so Susan and Helmer. So seeing none others for that, we'll look for a motion. So Mayor, if you want to move that.
I'll move that.
Seconded by Jeanette. All those in favor? And it carries. And just for those following home, just a reminder, if you just tuned in now, Jeanette won't be joining any because she's going to be retiring. So don't think she's not carrying her weight. She'll probably be getting phone calls from people anyway. So the second group we're looking at is the Budget and Negotiations Subcommittee. I was willing to put myself on that. Look for any other members. Councillor Helmer. And I think that should do it. Look for a motion from the mayor, seconded by Susan. Sure. And look for all those in favor? And it carries. And the last subcommittee we have, which is Community Relations, and I believe there was interest from Susan and Mayor Brown. All those in favor? And it carries. Great. So now the London Police Service Board has 3 new subcommittees, and you'll probably see that posted. And just members, I just wanted to, if you allow me, add a new business. So I just put forward a motion, and then the chair can call the question, the vice chair can call the question, but I wanted to write a letter to the province directly and allow them in the ministry as well, even though there's been previous communications on this, in particular, that there's going to be 2 empty provincial appointee seats. And I just wanted to bring a motion about that. So if the vice chair would be willing to take over the chair for a sec.
Delighted.
Thank you. So I wanted to move a motion to write a letter to the province advising them very clearly that there's going to be 2 provincial appointees that were going to be down, and to communicate that directly with the minister so that they're fully aware and the urgency and importance of that. So I'll move that and look for a seconder.
I see a seconder from Jesse. Any discussion? Jesse, did you want to put that good idea on the record?
I think that's a good idea.
If there's no further discussion, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? And passed. Back to you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So I believe that's it for us. Look for any other new items before we call the meeting to adjournment. Up.
Allow me.
Yes, go ahead.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn this meeting.
Moved by Jeanette, seconded by the mayor. All those in favor? And it carries. And just before members head out, as you know, at the end of our public meeting, we welcome members of the public to the open mic session where any members of the public have up to 5 minutes to speak directly to us. So we'll just look for one, going once. Going twice. Any member from the public has an opportunity to speak to the Police Service Board directly. Going twice and going 3 times. All right?
All right.
Thank you very much.